A fateful night in the ER. Dr. Ethan Parker, a dedicated and skilled trauma surgeon, stood in the hospital locker room, pulling on his scrubs as the intercom buzzed overhead. He'd been at Mercy General for nearly 2 decades, rising to become one of the most respected surgeons in the city. But the years had taken their toll. His once bright eyes now carried the weight of countless nights spent saving lives at the expense of his own. Ethan glanced at the small photograph tucked into his locker, a picture of a younger version of himself with a woman who had a radiant smile. She was holding a newborn baby. He hadn't looked at the picture in years, but it never felt right to throw it away. He shut the locker door with a sigh, heading into the bustling hospital corridors. It was a stormy Friday night, and the emergency room was packed. Ambulances rushed in, spilling patients injured in car accidents and other calamities brought on by the slippery roads. Ethan was about to check on a post-op patient when the intercom blared. Code trauma. Incoming vehicle collision. Critical injuries. ETA. 3 minutes. Ethan sprang into action, heading to the trauma bay to prepare with his team. Adrenaline coursed through him. This was where he thrived. The trauma team assembled around the sterile bay, their faces a mixture of focus and urgency. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside, and paramedics rushed in with a small figure on a stretcher. 6-year-old female, multiple trauma. One of them called out, his voice clipped. Vehicle collision. Passenger side. Vitals unstable, possible internal bleeding. Ethan's sharp gaze assessed the child. Her curly brown hair was matted with blood, and her pale face looked far too fragile under the oxygen mask. Yet even through the chaos, her tiny hand clung tightly to that of a woman who ran beside the stretcher, her face stricken with terror. "Ma'am, we need you to step back," one of the nurses said, trying to guide the woman away. Please save her." The woman cried, gripping the child's hand until the last possible moment. "She's my whole world. I'll do everything I can," Ethan promised, locking eyes with the woman for a brief moment before he turned his full attention to the girl. The next moments were a blur of controlled chaos. The trauma team worked seamlessly as they stabilized the girl, rushing her to the operating room. Ethan led the way, barking orders as his mind calculated probabilities and weighed risks. The child's injuries were extensive: severe internal bleeding, a collapsed lung, and fractured ribs pressing dangerously close to vital organs. "Push 2 units of O negative," he called out. "Prep for an emergency laparotomy. We need to control the bleeding now." As the surgical lights illuminated the girl's fragile form, Ethan's heart clenched. This wasn't just another case. There was something inexplicably familiar about her delicate features, though he couldn't place why. Shaking the thought from his mind, he focused entirely on the intricate dance of saving her life. For hours, the oar hummed with precision. Ethan's hands moved with steady expertise, navigating the maze of trauma within the child's tiny body. The team around him was just as focused, responding immediately to his commands. Time seemed to blur until, at last, he closed the final suture. "She's stable," Ethan said, his voice steady but laced with relief. "Good work, everyone." The nurses and anesthesiologist exchanged tired but satisfied looks as they began cleaning up. Ethan peeled off his gloves and surgical cap, his heart still racing. The girl was alive. For now. But the road ahead would be long. Exiting the oar, Ethan was met by the woman from earlier, pacing in the waiting area. Her dark hair was disheveled, and tear streaks marked her cheeks. The moment she saw him, she ran toward him. "How is she?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She made it through the surgery," Ethan said gently, though he kept his tone professional. "Your daughter is stable, but the next 48 hours will be critical. She's a fighter." The woman burst into tears, collapsing into a chair. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to stay or retreat to his office. Something about her vulnerability tugged at him. He sat down beside her, offering a tissue from his pocket. "You should try to get some rest. She's in good hands." She took the tissue, wiping her face before looking at him. "I don't know how to thank you, Doctor." "Dr. Parker," he replied. "Dr. Parker," she repeated, her voice soft. "I'm Ellie. That's my daughter, Lily." For a brief moment, her eyes locked with his, and Ethan felt an unspoken connection that he couldn't quite explain. But before he could dwell on it, Ellie reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter, the edges worn from handling. This was meant for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands trembled as she extended it to him. Ethan stared at the letter, confusion flickering across his face. "What is this?" Ellie's lips quivered, her voice catching as she spoke. "It's from someone you once knew. I promised her I'd give it to you if this day ever came." Taking the letter, Ethan unfolded it slowly. The handwriting on the page was unmistakable, an elegant script he hadn't seen in years. His heart clenched as he read the opening words. "Dear Ethan." The world seemed to tilt around him as he continued to read, each line tightening the knot in his chest. "Lily is your daughter." Ethan looked up at Ellie, his face pale, the letter shaking in his hand. This can't be true." Ellie's tear-filled eyes met his. "It is, and there's so much you don't know." The weight of her words settled over him like a tidal wave. The girl he'd just saved wasn't just another patient. She was his own flesh and blood. A surge of emotions hit him all at once: shock, anger, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the years he'd never known. "What happened? Why? Why didn't I know?" he asked, his voice cracking. Ellie took a shaky breath. "I'll tell you everything, but not here. For now, just be there for her. She needs you." Ethan glanced through the window at Lily's small, fragile body lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. His heart ached in ways he'd never experienced before. He nodded, his voice firm. "I will. Whatever it takes, I'll be there." Unbeknownst to him, this revelation was only the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront his past, rebuild trust, and navigate the delicate bond of a newfound family. The past unveiled. Ethan sat alone in his office, the letter spread open on his desk, illuminated by the dim light of his desk lamp. Outside the window, the city was cloaked in the stillness of night, rain pattering softly against the glass. The words on the page blurred as his mind raced, struggling to piece together a reality he had never suspected. The handwriting belonged to Caroline. He could picture her even now, her warm smile and sparkling laughter filling the room whenever she was near. They'd been young when they'd met, their love bright and full of promise. But life had a way of tearing people apart. Caroline had left abruptly one summer, leaving Ethan with nothing but unanswered questions and a hollow ache in his chest. And now, years later, he held in his hands a letter that shattered everything he thought he knew. "Dear Ethan, I've written and rewritten this letter so many times, trying to find the right words. Maybe there aren't any, but you deserve the truth, and I hope that one day you'll forgive me for keeping it from you. Her name is Lily. She's smart, brave, and kind, a miracle in every way. And she's yours. I didn't tell you because I was afraid of how you'd react, afraid of upending the life you were building. And if I'm honest, afraid of facing my own guilt for leaving. I thought I was protecting both of us, but I realize now how selfish that decision was. You deserved to know her from the beginning, and she deserved to know you. I know it's too late for apologies, but please, Ethan, if this letter finds you, don't turn away from her. She's everything good in this world, and she'll need her father someday. With love, Caroline." Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening against the edge of the desk. Anger, sorrow, and regret churned within him. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as fragments of the past flooded his mind. It had been a sweltering August day when Caroline had walked into his life. She was volunteering at a community clinic where Ethan was finishing his residency. She was the opposite of the clinical world he inhabited, vibrant and carefree, full of dreams about traveling the world and helping those in need. They'd fallen for each other hard and fast, the kind of love that felt like it could conquer anything. But as his career began to take off, the cracks started to show. Caroline struggled with the long hours Ethan spent at the hospital, the missed dates, the canceled plans. "Your work will always come first, won't it?" she'd asked him one night, her voice breaking. Ethan had tried to reassure her, promising that things would get better, but they hadn't. One day, she was gone, leaving only a note that said, "I need to find myself." He'd buried himself in his career after that, using his work as a shield against the pain of losing her. And now, all these years later, he realized that the life he had built was built on sand. A knock at the door jolted Ethan from his thoughts. He quickly folded the letter and slipped it into his desk drawer. When he opened the door, Ellie stood there, looking hesitant. "I wasn't sure if you want to talk," she said softly, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. Ethan stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "I do. I need to understand everything." Ellie nodded, sitting on the edge of a chair while Ethan leaned against his desk, arms crossed. The silence stretched between them before she began. "Caroline didn't tell me she was pregnant at first," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "She only told me after she left you. I didn't even know where she was until she showed up on my doorstep, already 6 months along." "Why didn't she tell me?" Ethan's voice was sharper than he intended. "Why would she keep something like this from me?" Ellie flinched but met his gaze. "She was scared, Ethan. You know how much she loved you. But she didn't think she could fit into the life you were building. And when Lily was born, Caroline was sick." "Sick?" Ethan's heart clenched. "She developed complications after the birth," Ellie explained. "It was serious. She fought hard for months, but in the end, she didn't make it." Ethan's breath caught. "She's gone." Ellie nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I promised her I'd take care of Lily, and I have. But I never planned to keep her from you. Caroline left that letter for you. I just didn't know how to give it to you, especially after all this time." Ethan rubbed his face, trying to process everything. The love of his life had been pregnant, given birth to his child, and then died, all without him knowing. He'd missed it all, the first cries, the first steps, the first words. And yet, despite everything, fate had brought Lily into his life. "Why now?" he asked finally, his voice breaking. "Why tell me after all these years?" Ellie looked at him earnestly. "Because Lily almost died tonight, Ethan. And sitting there, watching you fight to save her, I knew I couldn't keep this from you any longer. She needs you. And maybe you need her too." Ethan's jaw tightened as he struggled to rein in his emotions. "I do. But I don't even know how to be a father." "You'll figure it out," Ellie said softly. "Lily is an incredible little girl, and she deserves to know where she comes from. You're a part of her, Ethan, whether you're ready for it or not." Ethan stared at the floor for a long moment before finally meeting Ellie's eyes. "I want to be there for her. For both of you. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'll do whatever it takes." Ellie gave a small, sad smile. That's all she needs. Later that night, Ethan found himself standing outside Lily's hospital room. She was still sedated, her small chest rising and falling steadily under the crisp white sheets. The machines beeped softly, a reassuring rhythm that signaled stability. As he stepped inside, he was struck by how fragile she looked. He hesitated, then gently took her tiny hand in his, marveling at how small it was compared to his own. "Hi, Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your dad." The words felt foreign, but also right. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir within him, a sense of purpose beyond his work. This little girl was his, and he would do whatever it took to make up for the lost time. As he sat beside her, a fierce determination took root in his heart. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. And for Lily, he would. Learning to be a father, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the morning sunlight filtering through the blinds. He'd barely slept since the revelation, his thoughts consumed by memories of Caroline, the years he'd missed, and the little girl lying in the hospital bed who was now his responsibility. The half-drunk coffee in his mug had long gone cold, but he barely noticed. In front of him lay a blank notebook, its pages intimidatingly empty. He had scribbled to do at the top of the page, but hadn't been able to write anything more. He sighed and rubbed his temples. Where did someone even start when it came to parenting? His world had always been one of order, logic, and precision, a world where mistakes could mean life or death. But fatherhood was messy and unpredictable, and the idea of navigating it terrified him. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was Ellie. "She's awake," Ellie said as soon as he picked up. "She's been asking for you." Ethan's chest tightened. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. When Ethan walked into Lily's hospital room, she was sitting up in bed, her face pale but her dark brown eyes bright. A small tray with untouched food sat in front of her, and her stuffed bunny was tucked under one arm. Ellie sat beside her, looking tired but relieved. "Hi, Lily," Ethan said, stepping cautiously into the room. "How are you feeling?" Lily's gaze flicked to Ellie, who gave her a reassuring nod before turning back to Ethan. "I'm okay," Lily said softly, clutching her bunny a little tighter. "Mommy says you're my doctor." Ethan smiled as he approached the bed, pulling up a chair. "I am. But I'm more than that." Lily tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding. He glanced at Ellie, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Lily," he said gently, "I'm also your dad." Her eyes widened. "My dad? Really?" He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yes, really. I didn't know before, but now that I do, I want to be here for you. Always." Lily studied him with a seriousness that was surprising for a child her age. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she broke into a smile. "Do you like bunnies?" she asked, holding up her stuffed animal. Ethan laughed, relief washing over him. "I love bunnies." "This is Mr. Floppy," Lily said, handing him the bunny. "You can hold him." Ethan took the bunny carefully, as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you, Lily. I'll take good care of him." The next few days passed in a blur of hospital visits and late-night reflections. Ethan juggled his demanding work schedule with visits to Lily's room, where he spent hours reading stories, drawing pictures, and answering her endless stream of questions. She was curious about everything: his job, his favorite color, why he didn't have any gray hair yet. "Mommy says grown-ups get them when they're worried a lot." He was surprised by how easily he began to bond with her. The awkwardness he feared never materialized. Instead, he found himself looking forward to their time together. She had Caroline's spark, her quick wit, and her boundless curiosity. Every moment with her was a reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd been given. But as much as Ethan wanted to be there for Lily, he couldn't ignore the growing tension between himself and Ellie. Their conversations were polite but strained, each of them tiptoeing around unspoken frustrations and unresolved emotions. Ellie had raised Lily on her own for 6 years, and Ethan's sudden presence threatened to disrupt the delicate balance she'd worked so hard to create. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan found Ellie in the hospital cafeteria. She was sitting alone at a corner table, nursing a cup of tea. Her shoulders were hunched, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of exhaustion beyond the physical. "Ellie," he said as he approached, sitting down across from her, "we need to talk." She looked up, her expression wary. "About what?" "About Lily," he said, his voice steady. "And about us. I know this has been complicated, but I want to do what's best for her." Ellie sighed, setting her tea down. "Ethan, I don't doubt that you care about her. But caring isn't the same as being there every day. Lily has a routine, a life. I spent years making sure she feels safe and loved. I'm not going to let anything jeopardize that. I don't want to jeopardize it, Ethan said. I want to be a part of it. I know I've missed so much, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Please, Ellie, let me be her father. Ellie studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You don't understand what you're asking for. Being a father isn't just about showing up when it's convenient. It's about sleepless nights, scraped knees, and endless questions. It's about being there even when it's hard. I know it won't be easy, Ethan said, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Ellie's gaze softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Then prove it. Show me that you're here for the long haul, not just the honeymoon phase. Lily deserves stability, and I won't let her get hurt. Ethan nodded, his determination unwavering. I will. I'll prove it. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into his new role as a father. He adjusted his work schedule to spend more time with Lily, attending her physical therapy sessions, helping her with schoolwork, and even learning how to braid her hair. It's harder than surgery, he joked one morning, earning a giggle from Lily. He also began to build a rapport with Ellie, finding ways to support her without overstepping. He took on the financial burden of Lily's medical bills, though it took weeks to convince Ellie to accept his help. He started bringing groceries to their apartment, cooking simple meals that he'd Googled late at night. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, as Ethan was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, curious eyes. Daddy, she said softly, are you staying forever? Ethan's heart swelled. Forever and always, he promised, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're stuck with me now. Lily smiled, her eyelids growing heavy. Good, she murmured, because I like having two hearts. Two hearts? Ethan asked, confused. Yours and Mommy's, Lily explained sleepily. They keep me safe. Ethan sat beside her long after she fell asleep, her words echoing in his mind. He'd spent his life focused on saving lives, but now he realized that his most important work wasn't in the operating room. It was here, with his daughter and the family they were slowly, steadily becoming. Rebuilding trust. Ethan stood outside Ellie's apartment, a brown paper bag clutched in his hand. Inside were groceries, fresh produce, pasta, and a container of homemade soup he'd spent the morning laboring over. It wasn't much, but it was an offering, a small step toward building the bridge that had remained shaky between them. The sound of laughter floated through the door as he knocked. When Ellie answered, her smile faltered slightly but didn't fade completely. She opened the door wider, stepping aside to let him in. Ethan, she greeted, glancing at the bag in his hand. What's this? Dinner, he said, holding it out. Thought I'd save you some work tonight. Ellie hesitated, her gaze flickering to the kitchen where Lily was humming to herself as she colored at a table. You don't have to keep doing this. I know, Ethan said softly, but I want to. Ellie nodded, accepting the bag. Thanks. I was about to start cooking. You're welcome to stay. It was the first time she'd extended an invitation rather than merely tolerating his presence, and Ethan didn't miss the significance. He followed her into the kitchen, setting his coat on a chair as Lily turned to greet him. Daddy, she called out, beaming. The name still sent a pang through Ethan's heart, equal parts joy and regret. He bent down to hug her, marveling again at how easily she'd accepted him into her life. What are you working on, sweetheart? He asked, gesturing to the array of crayons and paper spread across the table. It's our family, Lily announced, holding up her drawing. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. Ethan recognized himself by the stethoscope she'd drawn around his neck. Beside him was Lily, clutching her stuffed bunny, and Ellie, smiling in a bright blue dress. It's beautiful, Ethan said, his throat tightening. He reached out to ruffle her curls. You're quite the artist. I know, Lily said matter-of-factly, making both adults laugh. As the evening unfolded, Ethan and Ellie worked side by side in the kitchen, a tentative rhythm forming between them. He chopped vegetables while she stirred the sauce, their conversation light but purposeful. They talked about Lily's progress in therapy, her upcoming school projects, and her new obsession with dinosaurs. But beneath the surface, tension still lingered. Ethan could feel it in the pauses between their words, in the way Ellie's eyes darted away whenever their hands accidentally brushed. As they sat down to dinner, Lily dominated the conversation with tales from school. Ethan listened intently, laughing at her anecdotes and marveling at her ability to find joy in the simplest things. But he couldn't help noticing the shadows under Ellie's eyes, the weariness in her posture that no amount of cheerful banter could hide. After dinner, while Lily was in her room playing, Ethan found Ellie in the kitchen, rinsing plates. He leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Ellie," he began carefully, "when was the last time you went to the doctor?" Ellie stiffened, her hands pausing mid-motion. "Why?" "Because you've been coughing more lately," Ethan said, his voice gentle but firm. "And you look exhausted. I know you're carrying a lot, but you can't ignore your own health." "I'm fine," she said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "Ellie," Ethan pressed, stepping closer. "Please, let me help you." She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with frustration. "I've been doing this on my own for 6 years, Ethan. I didn't need your help then, and I don't need it now." Her words stung, but Ethan refused to back down. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone. That's on me, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Please, let me be here for you." Ellie's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. It's hard, Ethan," she admitted, her voice muffled. "Letting someone else in after all this time. Depending on someone again." Ethan crouched beside her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "I know it's not easy, but you don't have to do this alone anymore. You've done an incredible job raising Lily, but it's okay to let someone help. It's okay to let me help." Ellie lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What if I let you in, and then you leave? What if it's too much for you?" "I won't leave," Ethan said firmly. "I promise you, Ellie. I'm here for the long haul. For Lily, and for you." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging between them. Finally, Ellie nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly to prove his commitment. He took Ellie to her doctor's appointments, stayed with Lily during her therapy sessions, and adjusted his schedule to be present for every important moment. He knew he couldn't erase the years he'd missed, but he could make sure that going forward, he was always there. Slowly but surely, Ellie began to let her guard down. She started sharing stories about Caroline, painting a picture of the woman Ethan had loved and lost. She told him about the early days with Lily, the sleepless nights, the milestones he hadn't been there for, and Ethan listened, absorbing every detail with a mix of gratitude and regret. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching Lily build a fort out of blankets and pillows, Ellie turned to Ethan and said, "You're doing a good job, with her." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time." "You can't make up for the past," Ellie said softly, "but you can be here now. And you are." Her words stayed with him long after she'd gone to bed, a quiet reassurance that he was on the right path. One Saturday morning, Ethan surprised Lily by taking her to the zoo. She squealed with delight as they explored the exhibits, her excitement infectious. At the penguin enclosure, she turned to him with wide eyes. "Daddy," she said, clutching his hand, "are we a real family now?" Ethan knelt beside her, his heart full as he met her gaze. "We've always been a real family, sweetheart. We just didn't know it yet." Lily smiled, throwing her arms around his neck. As he held her close, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the past or chasing a distant future. He was here, fully present, for the two people who mattered most. And that was enough. Facing the storm. The autumn wind howled through the city, rattling windows and swirling leaves into chaotic patterns along the sidewalks. Ethan stood at the window of his office, his hands shoved into the pockets of his white coat. The gray skies mirrored his mood as he stared at the rain streaking the glass. He couldn't shake the growing sense that something was wrong. Ellie hadn't been herself lately. She assured him repeatedly that she was fine, blaming her fatigue and persistent cough on the demands of motherhood and work. But Ethan's instincts told him otherwise. He'd seen the subtle signs, the way her hand trembled when holding a cup of tea, the paleness of her skin, and the unspoken tension in her eyes. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Nurse Andrea, one of his most trusted colleagues, stepped in with a clipboard in hand. "Dr. Parker," she said, her voice cautious. "The lab results you requested came in." Ethan's heart sank as he took the clipboard from her. He scanned the results, his worst fears confirmed. The autoimmune markers were elevated, significantly so. Ellie had been brushing off her symptoms for weeks, but the numbers on the page told a different story. Her condition was worsening. He set the clipboard down and rubbed his temples. "Thanks, Andrea. I'll handle it." Andrea hesitated before nodding and leaving him alone with the news. Ethan leaned against his desk, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulders. Ellie had always been fiercely independent, but this wasn't something she could fight alone. Later that evening, Ethan arrived at Ellie's apartment with Lily's favorite pizza in hand. Lily greeted him at the door, her face lighting up as she bounced on her tiptoes. "Daddy, you're here," she exclaimed, pulling him inside. "We're making decorations for my school play. Wanna help?" "I'd love to, kiddo," Ethan said, ruffling her curls. "But first, I need to talk to your mom." Ellie appeared in the doorway of the living room, her hair pulled back in a loose bun and her smile weary. "You didn't have to bring dinner," she said, though her tone wasn't unkind. "I wanted to," Ethan replied, setting the pizza box on the kitchen counter. "Can we talk for a minute? Privately?" Ellie's brow furrowed, but she nodded, leading him into the small dining room. She crossed her arms, leaning against the table as she waited for him to speak. Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Ellie, I got your lab results back." Her expression immediately shifted, her walls going up. "Ethan, I told you. You're not fine." He interrupted gently but firmly. "Your autoimmune markers are dangerously high. Ignoring this isn't an option anymore." Ellie's jaw tightened, and she looked away. "I don't have time to be sick, Ethan. Lily needs me. My job." "Lily needs you healthy," Ethan said, stepping closer. "You can't keep pushing yourself like this. If we don't start treatment now, things are going to get worse." Ellie's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I've been handling it, Ethan. For 6 years, I've handled everything on my own. I don't know how to let someone else take over." "You don't have to do it alone anymore," Ethan said, his voice softening. "I'm here, Ellie. Let me help." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "What if I let you in and you leave? What if it's too much?" "I'm not leaving," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I've missed too much already. I'm not missing anymore." Ellie's defenses crumbled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I'm scared, Ethan. What if the treatment doesn't work? What if I get worse?" Ethan crouched beside her, his hand resting gently on her arm. "We'll face it together. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. But we have to start now. For Lily. For us." Ellie lifted her head, her tear-streaked face filled with vulnerability. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The following weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, medication trials, and carefully monitored treatments. Ethan took charge of organizing Ellie's care, ensuring she had the best specialists and resources at her disposal. It was a delicate balance, managing his demanding career while being there for Ellie and Lily. But he didn't hesitate. At first, Ellie struggled with letting Ethan take the reins. She'd spent so long being the sole provider and protector that relinquishing control felt foreign and uncomfortable. But as the days passed, she began to see the depth of Ethan's commitment, not just to Lily, but to her as well. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching Lily put on an impromptu puppet show with her stuffed animals, Ellie leaned over to Ethan and whispered, "You're doing a good job." Ethan turned to her, his expression one of quiet determination. "So are you." Ellie smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in weeks. As Ellie's treatment progressed, Lily became Ethan's shadow, eager to spend every moment with him. They developed routines that felt like the foundation of a real family. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoons at the park, and bedtime stories that often stretched long past bedtime. One night, as Ethan tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, is Mommy going to be okay?" Ethan hesitated, his throat tightening. "Mommy's going through a tough time right now," he said carefully. "But she's strong, and we're doing everything we can to help her get better." Lily nodded solemnly. "Can I help too?" "You already are," Ethan said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You make her smile every day, and that's the best medicine there is." Lily smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "Then I'll keep making her smile." Months passed, and slowly but surely, Ellie began to improve. Her energy returned little by little, and the color came back to her cheeks. The weight she'd carried alone for so long began to lighten, shared now with Ethan. One crisp winter evening, as the three of them decorated the Christmas tree, Ellie paused to watch Ethan lift Lily to place the star on top. Her heart swelled with gratitude and something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. "Daddy, is the star straight?" Lily asked, squinting at the top of the tree. Ethan tilted it slightly. "How about now?" "Perfect," Lily declared, clapping her hands. Ellie stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. He looked down at her, his expression soft and full of unspoken emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" he asked. "For staying, for showing up, for loving us." Ethan smiled, pulling her into a gentle embrace as Lily wrapped her arms around both of them. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. And for the first time in years, Ellie believed it. Building forever. Winter's chill lingered in the air, frosting windows and blanketing the city in white. Inside Ellie's apartment, the warmth of family radiated from the cozy living room. The soft glow of the Christmas tree cast shimmering lights across the walls, illuminating Lily's excited face as she spread her freshly painted drawings across the floor. "Look, Daddy," she exclaimed, holding up a colorful piece of paper. "It's us at the park, and here's Mommy reading me a bedtime story." Ethan knelt beside her, marveling at the details she'd captured. The swing set, Ellie's book, even the crinkled lines of his own smile. "You're getting better every day, Lily. These are amazing." Lily beamed, her curls bouncing as she added her latest masterpiece to the growing pile. "Do you think Santa will like them? I'm leaving him some with his cookies. I think he'll love them," Ethan assured her, ruffling her hair. Ellie leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching the scene with a soft smile. It was a sight she never thought she'd see. Ethan fully immersed in their lives, his once guarded heart now open and filled with love for their daughter. The change in him was undeniable, and it filled her with equal parts gratitude and awe. As the evening wound down, Lily yawned and stretched, her energy finally waning. "Daddy, can you tuck me in tonight?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Of course," Ethan said, scooping her up effortlessly. "Let's get you to bed, kiddo." After Lily was tucked in, Ethan returned to the living room, where Ellie sat on the couch with a steaming mug of tea. She looked up as he entered, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Thanks for doing that," she said. "She's been so happy with you here." Ethan took a seat beside her, his gaze steady. "I'm happy to be here. I can't imagine being anywhere else." Ellie sipped her tea, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she set her mug down and turned to face him. "Ethan, there's something I've been meaning to say." He straightened, his heart thudding. "What is it?" "I was wrong," Ellie began, her voice trembling slightly. "When I kept Lily from you all these years, I thought I was protecting her. And maybe I was, but I was also protecting myself. I was afraid of what it would mean to let you back into my life. I didn't want to depend on anyone again, especially not you." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish. You've proved me wrong, Ethan. Over and over again, you've shown up for her, and for me. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me," Ethan said gently. "I was the one who wasn't there. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to both of you." Ellie shook her head. "You don't have to make anything up. You've already given us more than I ever thought possible." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the weight of the past giving way to the promise of a shared future. The next morning, the three of them ventured into the snow-covered park. Lily ran ahead, her laughter echoing as she tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue. Ethan and Ellie followed at a slower pace, their breath visible in the frosty air. "She's so full of life," Ethan said, watching Lily dart from one patch of snow to another. "She's been through so much, but she always bounces back," Ellie said, her tone filled with pride. "She gets that from Caroline." Ethan's smile faltered slightly at the mention of Caroline. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately," he admitted. "About everything I missed, everything I didn't know." Ellie reached out, her gloved hand brushing against his. "She made the choices she thought were best at the time. But I think she'd be proud of you, Ethan, of the man you've become, and the father you are to Lily." Her words filled him with a bittersweet warmth. "I hope so," he said softly. "I just want to do right by her." "You already are," Ellie said. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. Ethan moved into a new apartment nearby, creating a space where Lily could feel just as at home. Their days were filled with simple joys, making pancakes on Saturday mornings, building snowmen in the park, and cheering Lily on at her school play. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Lily surprised them both by announcing, "I think we need a family day. Just the three of us. We can do all my favorite things." Ellie laughed. "All your favorite things in one day? That's a tall order." "I think we can handle it," Ethan said, winking at Lily. "What's on the agenda?" Lily grinned, launching into an elaborate plan that included a trip to the zoo, a picnic in the park, and ending the day with her favorite ice cream. Ellie and Ethan exchanged amused glances, their unspoken agreement clear. They'd make it happen. The family day turned out to be a roaring success. Lily marveled at the animals of the zoo, chased birds in the park, and declared her ice cream the best ever. But the highlight of the day came just before sunset, as they sat on a blanket, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Lily snuggled between them, her head resting on Ellie's shoulder. "This was the best day ever," she said, her voice sleepy but content. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you, Daddy." Ethan felt his throat tighten as he glanced at Ellie, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We love you too, Lily," he said, his voice full of emotion. In that moment, Ethan realized just how far they'd come. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined them. They were a family now, imperfect but whole. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final light over the world, Ethan knew they were ready to face whatever came next, together. As the sun set, Lily's eyelids grew heavier, and she eventually fell asleep, curled between Ethan and Ellie. The soft rise and fall of her chest was a reminder of how fragile life could be, but also of its resilience. Ethan glanced at Ellie, her face peaceful in the fading light. "Thank you," he said softly. Ellie turned to him, her brows furrowing in confusion. "For what?" "For letting me in," Ethan replied. "For trusting me with Lily, and with everything." Ellie's lips curved into a faint smile. "You earned it, Ethan. You didn't just step in when it was easy. You stayed when it was hard. That's not something I take lightly." He reached out, covering her hand with his. "I'll never stop trying, Ellie. For you and for her." Ellie's smile deepened, and for a moment, they sat in silence, watching the last traces of sunlight fade from the sky. A new beginning. Months later, spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Ellie's health continued to improve under careful treatment, and Ethan's presence became a constant source of support. Their lives intertwined in ways that felt natural, as though this was how it was always meant to be. One Saturday morning, Lily burst into Ethan's apartment, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, guess what?" Ethan set down his coffee, smiling at her enthusiasm. "What's up, kiddo?" "Mommy said we can plant a garden in the backyard." Lily exclaimed. "Flowers and vegetables and everything." "That sounds amazing," Ethan said, pulling her into a hug. "What's the first thing we're planting?" "Strawberries," Lily declared, her eyes sparkling. "And sunflowers." Ellie appeared in the doorway, her smile soft as she watched them. "She's been talking about it nonstop since breakfast," she said, stepping inside. "It's a great idea," Ethan said, his gaze lingering on Ellie. "We'll make it the best garden ever." The backyard became a canvas for their dreams, a place where laughter and life flourished. Lily insisted on wearing overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, declaring herself the garden boss, while Ethan and Ellie followed her instructions with amused smiles. As the weeks passed, the garden grew, vibrant and full of promise. It became a reflection of their journey, something nurtured with care, patience, and love. The next chapter. One evening, as they sat in the backyard under the glow of string lights, Lily played nearby, arranging rocks into patterns on the ground. Ethan turned to Ellie, his expression serious. "There's something I've been thinking about," he said. Ellie set down her glass of iced tea, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Ellie's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "I've spent my life focused on saving others," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But you and Lily saved me. You gave me a chance to be part of something bigger than myself, a family. I don't want to waste another moment without making it official." Ellie's eyes filled with tears as Ethan knelt before her. "Ellie, will you marry me?" Lily looked up from her rock designs, her face lighting up. "Mommy, say yes. Say yes." Ellie laughed through her tears, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch Ethan's cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course, yes." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger as Lily cheered, running over to throw her arms around both of them. The three of them hugged tightly, their laughter and tears blending into a moment that felt timeless. Full circle. The day of their wedding dawned bright and clear, the spring air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Surrounded by close friends and family, Ethan and Ellie exchanged vows in a small garden ceremony. Lily stood between them as the flower girl, beaming with pride. As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Does this mean we're forever now?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Ethan knelt to her level, his eyes shining. "We've always been forever, Lily. This just makes it official." Lily grinned, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too," Ethan said, holding her close. "Forever and always." Epilogue. A garden of love. Years later, the backyard garden remained a cherished sanctuary. The sunflowers stood tall, and the strawberry patch thrived under Lily's careful watch. Ethan and Ellie often sat on the porch, watching their daughter chase butterflies and pick flowers for the kitchen table. Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges, compromises, and moments of doubt. But it was real, and in that reality, they found their strength. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan wrapped an arm around Ellie, their gazes fixed on Lily, now a confident and vibrant young girl. "Thank you for this," Ethan said quietly. "For what?" Ellie asked, smiling up at him. "For giving me the family I never knew I needed." Ellie leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "You gave it to us too, Ethan." And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they knew their story wasn't just one of loss and redemption. It was a testament to love's ability to heal, to grow, and to endure forever.